Welcome back, people. As you might see, the era has changed, in particular when it comes to the GUI. It looks a lot nicer, but also I've changed the library I'm using to deal with the GUI. I've removed my old GUI system and replaced it with a library called Dear ImGui, which as opposed to my old GUI library is what's called an immediate GUI system. The big difference is that instead of having a persistent state on your GUI elements, so for example, a button would have a say list of listeners, and every time you press the button, it will inform all the listeners about that the button has been pressed, and then the listeners would execute their logic, which in this case, I've pressed this is to create a mesh in the editor. Now, the big problem with this system is that as you change things in the editor via shortcuts or different menus, that you need to make sure that everything that's visible uh, is synchronized with the actual data that's in the editor. So, for example, I've got a rendering options here. So, if I say pressing a button to not render normals, I would have to inform the editor to not render the normals. And after it has done that, is to basically report back to the render options that normals are indeed not being rendered. Because if you close the button and open it again, they want to make sure that this is still consistent with what's going on, even though if I close it and I press some shortcuts to change things, I still want, after opening this, that the checkboxes correspond to the current render options in the editor. So it's like a pain in the butt to maintain, to have like lists of listeners, make sure that everything is set, is basically uh, is up to date with all the current and latest data. Now the difference with an immediate GUI system is there's no persistency whatsoever anymore, because the GUI system is recreated and re-rendered every single frame. So I don't have to inform the GUI about changes to the data because the GUI system doesn't care, it's stateless. And every time the GUI system is recreated, it will read all the latest data and will then reflect what that data is in its GUI. So that's cut down the amount of GUI code I have to write by, I'd say, 2/3. And creating new entities in the GUI system and updating the GUI is so much easier and so much less of a pain to deal with. Especially now that I've moved the editor to work on entity and components exclusively. And because there's a lot of data in there, I don't want to have to update the GUI system every time that data changes for whatever reason. But because now the GUI has been re-rendered every single frame, it will just read the latest data uh, and relates that to the user. So today I also want to give you an example of what I can do now that I've updated the GUI to deal or add like more easily with entities and components. So before I have shown you small things like basically linking an item to path nodes. So I would do stuff like create path nodes and then give this a path node, basically make this able to link to path nodes and make it active. And then say, okay, you link to say u number 3. So you link to entity number 3, active with a certain speed. And if I were to execute this, you would unsurprisingly find that will move to that path node quite easily. However, there's no need to have like special path nodes as I had before, because all a path node is a scene component, because it exists somewhere in the scene, so it's got a transformation matrix. All it has special in addition to this is a editor path node component. But it doesn't need to be a specific thing. I can just create a new thing up here, for example. Give it, I don't make this cylinder or something like this, and say you are now a path node component. I can tell this entity here, go to that path node component I just created. And you should see it'll simply move there, no problem, because all it cares about is it's an entity that has this particular component, and therefore in the GUI code, when I populate this drop-down list, I go through all entities and check which one has this particular component to it. And if so, it's added. And if I change it, I send a message, or basically create an action to change the where it's basically linked to, and that's then reflected into the GUI because data's changed, and the new data will always be displayed the frame after. So similarly, before I showed you guys stuff with trigger volumes, where I can basically affect where these things go to by sending messages. So that has now been enshrined by using components, only components. So a trigger volume is now a type component that tells me it's a trigger volume, as opposed to something that can be activated by pressing a button or being no type whatsoever, which is the default. It has a CNode component because we still need some information where the collision is that a plane needs to collide with to trigger the volume. And then it's got a message component, which is all the messages it will send after being triggered. So what we want to do now is strip this down to this having nothing to link to and also not being active. And now have the trigger volume send messages to this entity to become active and go to one of these three path node components. So select the trigger volume. We say, okay, to which entity you want to send a message. We say entity number 1. And then it will populate the message options with all messages we can send based on the components that this entity has. So currently it's got a CNode component, but we got no particular messages for those. It's got an active component, so we got an activate message. And it's got a link to path node components, and we can send a message to switch to which path node that thing should go. So if you click the activate message, we'll see all the options for that message. And we say, okay, I want to make it active and then create the message. And we'll see this green line going there. Now after the message has been created, we can change it by pressing the buttons here. And if we say we want to send a deactivate message, we click this, you see the line becomes red. And now after it's been triggered, this entity will receive a message to become inactive. But for now, we'll keep it active. And then if you go back to the message options, you will see that the active message has been removed because we already have one. So the only one left is a switch path node message. After clicking it, we get again the options for that message, and we can now link it to a path node. So this is populated by going over all the entity IDs and check which one of those have a path node component. And this got 2, 3, and 4. So let's make it go to number 4. You can set the speed, create message, and now we see there's no further message options because all the components that this entity has, we already sent messages to those. So we've got the activate or deactivate message, and then a message which one we want to go to. And as you can see, we can just edit those as we wish from the editor. And we can also remove these components if we want to. So we want this, remove. And now again, we can see that we can now again send an activate message because it doesn't exist, etc. So let's add a player to the mix. So I can actually go there. Create nav mesh. There we go. And now by moving over here, we can see it starts moving to the path node component, or entity with path node component up top. So if we change, say, the type from trigger volume to activatable, it will now ask us to press a button. So you see nothing happens, but after I press a button, it will start moving. But as before, we don't need special nodes that we can create over here. You can make anything into a trigger volume or a thing that can send messages. So let's do that here. So let's create a, I don't know, say a pyramid, like so. And let's say this pyramid has a type. So it's got a trigger volume type, meaning if we intersect with this mesh, it will trigger and send anything it can. Give it a message component. And as before, send a message to entity number 1, make active. Switch to path node number 4 at a certain speed. Make it a little bit faster. Actually, let's move it to different ones, like number 2 or something. Boom. So now we got two options. Got the pyramid and the trigger volume. So by trigger volume, we press it, it goes over there. But if we go over the pyramid, we can see it moves to this component over here. And basically go back and forth really want to. But you get the idea. So that's the wonderful thing about a entity component system, is I can basically add any components to an entity and turn any entity into whatever I please. So it's really powerful, really flexible, and with its new GUI system, it's much more easier to edit all these components, set messages, and do whatever I want really. As I think I showed this before, but editing properties of, say, materials, it's also a lot more easier because I can just change any of the properties as I want. Makes it more emissive to different colors. I can change the textures. It's yeah, it's a wonderful flexible system. Yeah. It makes like editing like so much easier than before, because it's just, yeah, it's just amazing. So that's basically all I've got to show you guys. So it's the new GUI system, plus the way to very easily edit entities and stuff like that. So it's, yeah, it's a real treat to work with this this new system. So that's all I've got for you for now. So hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, look forward to the next video. Hopefully I'll be showing some work in progress on the actual platform I'm making. But yeah, that's all I've got. Hope you enjoy, and see you next time. Bye bye.